Growing up, I thought my family was perfect. Not in a flashy magazine cover kind of way, but in the simple, wholesome way you see in old sitcoms. We lived in a small town where everyone knew each other's names. My dad, Richard, was a high school teacher. My mom, Linda, stayed at home, always baking something or folding laundry with a warm smile. And then there were the three of us. Josh, the oldest golden boy with a baseball scholarship. Natalie, the middle child and artsy soul. And me, Emily, the youngest. The quiet one, the good girl. I used to believe we were all equally loved. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes and streamers. Christmas mornings were filled with laughter and matching pajamas, and every Friday night was movie night with popcorn and blankets in the living room. I never questioned anything. Why would I? My parents hugged us often. They said, "I love you," at the end of every phone call. On the surface, everything looked right. Josh was the star. He had trophies lined up on his bedroom shelves and his picture framed in the living room. Dad took him to every baseball game. Mom packed his lunches with little handwritten notes. "Go get him, champ," they'd say. Natalie was the creative one. Her drawings covered the refrigerator door. She got a new set of paints every holiday. They signed her up for art classes downtown, praised every little sketch she made. And then there was me. I never minded being the quiet one. I didn't ask for much. I did well in school, kept my room clean, and always said please and thank you. I was the peacekeeper, the listener, the easy child. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be born into this family. We were close. We were safe. We were loved. Sure, there were small things. Josh never got grounded even when he skipped curfew. Natalie got her way more often than not. Sometimes I get scolded for things we all did, but I figured that's just how it goes. Parents get tired, mistakes happen, I brushed it off. Back then I had no idea that love could be uneven, that affection could be rationed, that sometimes being the quiet one meant being the one who got forgotten first. But that realization came much, much later. And when it did, it shattered everything I thought I knew. I remember thinking, every kid gets yelled at sometimes. Every kid gets blamed for stuff they didn't do. That's just part of growing up, right? When Josh borrowed Dad's car at 17 without asking, they called it a teenage mistake. When Natalie flunked a math test, Mom comforted her with cookies and "You're more of a creative soul anyway." But the one time I got a B+ in science, Dad gave me a long talk about not slacking and living up to my potential. I told myself they just expected more from me, that maybe being the youngest meant they saw something in me worth pushing, so I tried harder. I kept my grades perfect, joined the choir, helped Mom with dinner, or offered to babysit my cousin during family get-togethers. I made sure to never talk back, never ask for too much. "Emily, you're a rock," Mom once said. "You're the one we never have to worry about." At the time, it felt like a compliment, like I was dependable, steady, needed. But looking back now, it sounds more like I was invisible. Reliable to the point of being taken for granted. When Josh quit college for a year to figure things out, they paid his rent without hesitation. When Natalie moved to the city to find herself, they helped her furnish an entire apartment. When I got accepted into my dream university, with a partial scholarship no less, Mom smiled politely and said, "That's nice, honey. But have you looked into schools closer to home?" I didn't complain. I didn't cry. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. I always did what was expected. I figured that if I kept being the good kid, eventually I'd earn the same kind of warmth, the same level of pride they poured so freely into Josh and Natalie. But no matter how hard I tried, it never came. And yet, I never questioned their love. I just assumed. Maybe this was what love looked like when it was directed at the easy child. Maybe the quiet ones didn't need all the attention. Maybe being overlooked was just another way of being trusted. It would take years and one brutal revelation to understand just how wrong I was. I think I first started noticing the cracks when I was around 13, not in a dramatic, earth-shattering way, just little things. Small imbalances I couldn't quite name at the time, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. Josh had just turned 18 and wrecked his car on a minor fender bender. He was texting while driving, ran a stop sign, and thankfully no one was hurt. I remember standing in the kitchen waiting for the storm to hit. I thought Dad would lose it. Instead, I watched as he clapped Josh on the shoulder and said, "It happens. Just be more careful next time, bud." And then Mom added, "At least you're okay. That's all that matters. They bought him a new car the next month. A better one. I didn't say anything. I just kept stirring the pasta on the stove. When Natalie pierced her nose without asking, Mom freaked out at first, but then called it a phase, and took her to a professional to do it properly. When she skipped school to go to an art protest downtown, they laughed it off. At least she's passionate about something. But when I forgot to unload the dishwasher one night after doing homework for hours, I got a lecture about being responsible and earning your place in the family. I brushed it off. Everyone gets disciplined, I thought. Parents are stricter with some things. I just need to do better. By 15, I started noticing how much freedom Josh and Natalie had. They came and went as they pleased. Josh would sneak out and still get breakfast waiting for him in the morning. Natalie would slam doors and roll her eyes and still get $20 to go to the mall. Me? I asked once to go to a sleepover, and Mom said, "That's not really your scene, sweetheart. You're not like other girls." Not like other girls. I heard that a lot. When Natalie needed money for art supplies, they gave it to her without question. Josh? He got a monthly stipend even after dropping out of college. When I asked for a new graphing calculator for AP Math, Mom told me to check thrift stores or borrow one from school. I got a job that summer, part-time at a bookstore. It wasn't much, but I saved every penny for school stuff, the occasional coffee and gifts for the family. Nobody ever asked where the money came from. There was this one Thanksgiving. Josh showed up late, clearly hungover. Natalie brought some guy no one knew and spent the whole dinner whispering with him at the table. I helped Mom cook all morning, set the table, cleaned everything after. And yet, when Dad gave his usual holiday toast, he raised his glass and said, "To my amazing kids. Josh, our future businessman. Natalie, our beautiful artist." He didn't mention me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was being dramatic, sensitive. I kept telling myself that for years. Still, the pattern grew louder the older I got, and no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, something in me had started to shift, like a tiny crack in a windshield that spiderwebs outward every time the car hits a bump. It wasn't about gifts or money or praise. It was about the message beneath it all, that Josh and Natalie were seen, valued, celebrated, and I was there, convenient, predictable, expected. I once overheard Mom on the phone with a friend talking about us. Josh is doing well, thank God. Natalie's finding herself. Such a free spirit. And Emily? Oh, she's our sweet one, quiet. No trouble at all. She just kinda does her thing. I don't think she meant it as an insult, but it landed like one. I started wondering if I ever did mess up, really mess up, would they still be in my corner the way they were for Josh and Natalie? Would I get grace? Forgiveness? A second chance? I wasn't so sure, and that scared me. By the time I turned 16, the pattern was undeniable. I wasn't just being overlooked anymore, I was under a microscope. It felt like every little thing I did was scrutinized. Every mistake was amplified, every success expected and quickly dismissed. Josh could crash a car and still get his rent paid. Natalie could skip class and still be praised for her independence. But if I came home 5 minutes late from tutoring, I'd find Mom waiting by the door with her arms crossed, demanding an explanation. "You know better, Emily," she'd say. "We expect more from you." They always expected more, but they gave less. I remember one time I got an A- on a chemistry test. I was proud of it. I'd stayed up late for days studying. When I showed it to Dad, he barely looked up from his paper. "You usually get A's. What happened?" Another time I volunteered to organize a school fundraiser. I spent weeks planning, coordinating with teachers, making posters. The event raised over $1,000. Natalie came to the school that day to drop off snacks, just for 10 minutes. Later, I heard Mom telling a neighbor, "Natalie was such a big help with that fundraiser. Emily was there too, I think." That stung more than I'd like to admit. Then there was my junior year. I got sick. Really sick. A bad case of mono that knocked me out for weeks. I missed school, lost weight, and fell behind in class. I expected my parents to worry, to hover the way they did when Josh broke his leg or when Natalie had a panic attack during finals. But they didn't. Mom told me to drink more fluids. Dad asked if I was being a little dramatic. Natalie visited once, dropped off a smoothie, and then left without saying much. Josh didn't even call. I remember lying in bed, weak and feverish, hearing Mom laughing downstairs as she helped Natalie prep for her portfolio submission. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I disappeared. Would anyone notice? Maybe not right away. Things got worse when college applications rolled around. I wanted to apply out of state, just one school I loved, with a scholarship program for science majors. I'd researched it for months, built my resume around their requirements, and even reached out to alumni. But when I brought it up at dinner, Mom frowned. That's so far away, Emily. What if something happens to you? Besides, you don't really like change. You'd be better off somewhere closer. Dad chimed in with, "You're not like Josh. He's street smart. You need stability." Natalie barely looked up from her phone. It was like they had already decided who I was, what I was allowed to be. My identity wasn't mine. It was whatever they'd assigned to me. The quiet one, the stable one, the one who stays. I ended up applying to the local college, the one they wanted. I got in. They didn't even throw a dinner to celebrate. That spring, Natalie lost her job in the city and moved back home. The house turned upside down to accommodate her. Dad converted the guest room into an art studio. Mom started baking more often. Just the way Natalie likes it. Josh came home for a weekend and got a welcome back champ banner. I came home one night to find my childhood bedroom repainted without warning. Mom had decided it needed a refresh since you're hardly ever here anyway. That night I cried in the garage. Not because of the paint, but because I finally realized I didn't belong in my own home. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love that was never withheld from Josh or Natalie. I bent over backward for approval that came to them freely, and yet I was still the one who got the lectures, the guilt trips, the impossible expectations. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't even second place. I was the fallback, the filler, the one who didn't cause trouble so they never had to care. But something inside me was changing, slowly, quietly, and soon. I'd stopped trying altogether. It started with the house. Again. After months of passive-aggressive nudges and not-so-subtle hints, my parents finally told me they needed me to move out, for good this time. Natalie had officially claimed the guest room for her art studio, and Mom insisted that, at 22, it's time you flew on your own. They made it sound like a compliment, like I was so capable and responsible that I no longer belonged under their roof. Meanwhile, Josh had moved back in twice over the past 3 years, and no one batted an eye. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I was ready anyway. But truthfully, it felt like I was being quietly erased. Uncle Henry showed up on moving day. My dad's younger brother, the black sheep of the family. Divorced, bearded, drove a beat-up truck. But always kind to me. I hadn't seen him in years. But he pulled me into a hug like we'd never missed a beat. We loaded boxes into his truck, mostly in silence. Then out of nowhere, he said, "Damn shame what they're doing." I turned. "What do you mean?" He glanced toward the house. "Pushing you out like that after everything." I gave a sad smile. "It's fine. They just think I'm ready." He shook his head. "You were always more than ready. Hell, you were the glue in this whole mess." That's when he paused. "Your dad always said things would be equal. When they took you in. That was the deal." I blinked. "What do you mean? When they took me in?" He looked at me, puzzled. "Wait. You do know you're adopted, right?" The world stopped spinning. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. Henry's face went white. "Jesus, Em, I thought you knew. I thought they told you after that medical scare when you were a kid." "No," I whispered. "They never said anything." He rubbed his forehead. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have." But I wasn't listening anymore. I don't remember finishing the move. I don't even remember saying goodbye. I drove back to the house that night under the excuse of grabbing a few more things. No one was home. Mom and Dad were out at Natalie's art show. I went straight to Dad's study. The desk drawer that had always been locked was ajar for once. His keys were there, dangling off the familiar leather ring with the faded fishing hook keychain. I hesitated. Then I took them. In the attic, everything smelled like dust and old paper. I found the wooden cabinet tucked behind the Christmas bins. My hand shook as I inserted the brass key. Click. Inside were folders, photo albums, and an old metal fireproof box with a second lock. I found the smaller key taped to the inside wall of the cabinet. My breath hitched as the second lock clicked open. Inside were only a few things. A manila envelope labeled Emily Adoption Records. A photocopy of my birth certificate, a notarized will. A handwritten letter in feminine script. The first thing I opened was the will. Dated just 2 years ago. Josh. The house. Natalie. The retirement fund and all savings. And under other heirs. No further disbursements. In lieu of inheritance, a charitable donation will be made on behalf of remaining dependents. No mention of my name. None. I opened the envelope labeled Adoption Records. Inside were official documents confirming everything. I was adopted at 4 months old. Closed case. No contact with the biological parents. Finalized through a private agency. I grabbed the letter last. The paper was soft with age. To our sweet girl. The words swam on the page. We love you. Giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I couldn't raise a baby alone. They promised to love you like their own. They said they wouldn't tell you. You'd never feel different. I hope that was true. It wasn't. God, it wasn't. Everything began to collapse in my mind like dominoes. Josh being Dad's boy. Natalie inheriting Mom's eyes. The holidays, the birthdays, the little exclusions I'd brushed off for years. They weren't quirks. They weren't coincidences. They were reminders that I was never theirs. Not really. I stumbled downstairs, letter still in my hand. Mom was in the kitchen, casually slicing fruit like the world hadn't just split open upstairs. She saw me and froze. What is that? I held up the letter. Who is Denise? Her face drained of color. Emily. Why didn't you tell me I was adopted? She took a step forward. We were going to. We just didn't know when. And the will? I asked. When were you going to tell me I didn't even count as family? It's not like that. It is exactly like that, I snapped. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my tiny studio apartment with my boxes still unpacked, rereading the documents over and over, trying to convince myself this was a dream. But it wasn't. The next morning I called a lawyer. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet, obedient girl who just took what she was given. I was done being invisible. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in my hands. I reread every word, again and again, as if the meaning might change. They promised to love you like their own. That line hit me hardest. Had they ever tried? I thought about every childhood memory that once brought me comfort. The bedtime stories, the birthday cakes, the family vacations, all those things I clung to believing they were proof of love. But now, they felt hollow, manufactured, a performance to keep up appearances. I remembered how Dad only ever hugged me in front of other people, how Mom would forget I hated raisins and keep baking oatmeal cookies anyway. At the time I broke my arm and Josh got the day off school to keep me company, only to spend it playing video games in the other room while I lay on the couch alone. All the tiny slights, the subtle shifts in tone, the way they never looked quite proud of me, the way they did for Josh and Natalie. I used to excuse it all, tell myself I was just sensitive. That love came in different forms. But love isn't supposed to make you feel replaceable. It wasn't just the adoption. It was the secrecy, the erasure, the fact that they'd planned a life without me while still letting me orbit around their world like a convenient afterthought. I wasn't grieving a lie. I was grieving the person that I'd been before I knew the truth. The girl who believed with every fiber of her being that if she just kept being good enough, kind enough, useful enough, she'd eventually be loved the same. But now I knew. No amount of good could undo being unwanted, and that realization didn't just break my heart. It broke everything. I didn't cry again after that night. Not when I moved the rest of my things out. Not when Mom texted, "Let's not make this bigger than it is." Not even when Natalie sent a half-hearted, "You okay?" As if my entire identity hadn't just been shattered. What I felt wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. A cold, sharp clarity I'd never known before. I stopped responding to messages. I didn't go home. I didn't explain. I disappeared from their world the same way they'd tried to erase me from theirs. But I wasn't done. 2 weeks after the discovery, I sat across from a family lawyer in a quiet office downtown. Her name was Mrs. Thompson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened without interrupting. When I finished telling her everything, about the will, the adoption, the years of being treated like an afterthought, she leaned back and said, "They legally adopted you. That makes you their daughter. which means if you've been excluded from the will without justification, we might have grounds to contest. I didn't care about the money. I didn't want the house or the retirement fund or Natalie's trust account. I just wanted them to see what they'd done, to feel it. Ms. Thompson helped me draft a formal letter requesting a copy of the will and notification of any estate-related transfers. It wasn't aggressive, just legal, cold, and detached. I mailed it to my parents' house with my full name and return address printed in clean block letters. 3 days later, Dad called. I didn't answer. He called again, then Mom, then Josh, who left a voicemail saying, "You're being ridiculous. This is a family stuff, not a courtroom." Exactly. That was the problem. They'd always treated me like an obligation, something to manage, not someone to cherish. Now they would have to deal with me like the adult I had become. A week passed. Then came the email from my mother. Subject, please. Read Emily. We received your letter. I don't know what you're trying to do here, but this isn't the way. You're still our daughter. We love you, even if you don't see it right now. Please don't drag this through the courts. Let's talk. Mom. I stared at the screen, stunned by the audacity. We love you. As if love had ever looked like silence, like secrets, like giving your other children the world and telling me to be grateful for scraps. I didn't reply. Instead, I posted a message on my private social media, only visible to extended family and mutual friends. Imagine finding out you were adopted through a stranger. Imagine finding legal documents that exclude you from the family inheritance while you're still living under the same roof. Imagine being told your entire life you were just easier while watching love handed freely to others. That was my reality. And I won't stay silent anymore. The fallout was instant. An aunt called, sobbing, saying she had no idea. A cousin reached out saying they always wondered why I never came to holidays anymore. Even Uncle Henry texted, "Proud of you, kid. Took guts." I didn't post it for attention. I posted it for accountability. If they wanted to pretend like nothing happened, they could do it without the comfort of secrecy. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter from my father's attorney. It stated that while the will remained unchanged, my parents would consider a gesture of goodwill, a small trust, in recognition of Emily's contributions to the family. I laughed. Contributions? Like quietly raising myself. Like being the emotional dumping ground for their expectations while Josh and Natalie got medals for showing up? I declined. Instead, I sent a reply through Ms. Thompson. Thank you for the offer. Unfortunately, money does not resolve generational erasure. What I want is acknowledgement, not compensation. I suggest you start with an apology. A real one. I never got a reply. But I didn't need one, because for the first time in my life I had said no. I had drawn a line and stood behind it. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming the version of myself they had tried to bury, the version that saw her own worth, with or without their approval. And I wasn't going back. The silence that followed my lawyer's response was louder than any argument we'd ever had. No apology came, no phone calls, just a void where a family should have been. Until the deflections began. It started with Natalie. She texted me at midnight one night. "You really didn't have to go public. That was low, Em. You made Mom cry." Cry? I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not "I'm sorry," not "I had no idea." Just guilt-tripping and blame. Classic. I didn't reply. A day later, Josh messaged me. "You think you're the only one who had it hard. Grow up. We all made sacrifices. You were just quieter about it." Sacrifices? Like what? Watching your rent get paid while I worked 2 jobs? Like being praised for every C you brought home while I was scolded for A-minuses? It was like they couldn't fathom that they were the problem. That their comfort had come at the cost of my invisibility. Then Mom called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her voice trembling. "Emily, I don't know what's gotten into you. You were always our strong one. You never needed as much. That's why we gave more to Josh and Natalie. They needed it more." I sat in stunned silence, replaying that line. You never needed as much. It wasn't a justification. It was a confession. They had always seen me as less. Not because I was less, but because I didn't break loudly enough for them to notice. And now, when I finally did, they acted like I was the one setting the house on fire. The gaslighting would have crushed the old version of me. The one who craved approval so desperately she would have said, "Maybe they're right." But I was done shrinking to fit their comfort. I called Miss Thompson the next morning and said, "We move forward." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, silence, and secondhand whispers from extended relatives who had no idea and can't believe they never told you. Neither could I. But amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. Support started pouring in from the people who actually saw me. My old college roommate Sarah invited me to stay with her while I got back on my feet. "You don't have to go through this alone," she said, no questions asked. My coworker Liam, sweet, steady, observant, started showing up more. He'd drop off coffee with a sticky note that read, "You matter," or check in just to ask how I was sleeping. We weren't close before, but somehow he knew how to make space without pressing too hard. One afternoon I broke down in his car after a long day at court. I told him everything, the attic, the letter, the will, the voicemail. He didn't flinch. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. "You didn't imagine any of this. They just trained you to think you did." I cried for the first time in weeks. But it wasn't the same kind of cry. It wasn't grief. It was release. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be strong to prove something. I was just allowed to feel, to exist, to take up space. And slowly, I started building something new. A routine that was mine. Friendships that were mutual. A home, not defined by walls, but by people who chose me every day without condition. One day I got an email from Mom. Subject, "Just talk, Emily, I miss you. This has all been blown out of proportion. You're still family. Please let's not keep dragging this on. Maybe we can meet? Just us. No lawyers, no drama. Love, Mom." For a moment I hesitated. But then I remembered her voice on that voicemail. They needed it more. I remembered Natalie's text. "You made Mom cry. Josh's message. Grow up." I thought of every birthday half acknowledged, every praise that never came, every conversation where I had to fight to be seen. And I realized something. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the same burning house, so I replied simply, "Thank you for reaching out. I wish you peace." But I found mine elsewhere. And I meant it. It's been almost 3 years since I walked out of that house for the last time. I live in a different city now. It's not big or glamorous, but it's mine. I have a small apartment with plants I remember to water and a coffee machine that hisses every morning at exactly 7:03. There's no screaming, no cold silences, just peace. I work as a project coordinator for a nonprofit that helps foster youth transition into adult life. It's funny how life brings you full circle. Sometimes I meet kids who remind me of myself, the ones who feel like they have to earn their place in every room, the ones who apologize for existing. I always look them in the eye and say, "You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You're already enough." I wish someone had said that to me sooner. But maybe I had to say it to myself first. I won't pretend healing came easily. There were nights I sat alone with a takeout box and wondered if I'd made the right choice. There were birthdays I cried quietly because no one called. Holidays I scrolled through other people's family photos and asked, why not me? But then came other moments. The kind that builds slowly, like sunlight through curtains. Like the first time I turned off my phone on Christmas and read a book in silence. Or the first time someone said, "I'm proud of you." And I believed it. Liam and I still talk, more than talk, actually. He was patient with me. Kind. He never asked me to be cheerful when I wasn't or explain my pain like it needed permission. He just stayed. And somehow that meant more than anything anyone else had ever done. I don't know if I've forgiven my parents. Sometimes I think I have. Other times I hear a voicemail from Mom I never returned and realize I'm still angry. Not just at them, but at the version of me who waited so long for crumbs and called it love. But that girl's gone now. I don't chase what doesn't love me back. I don't shrink myself to fit anyone's comfort, and I don't call silence strength anymore. Every now and then I hear updates about them, my parents, Josh, Natalie. A cousin told me Dad's been having health issues, that Mom retired early. Natalie moved out again, apparently after a fight with Mom about space and boundaries. Go figure. Josh started a new business. No one's sure if it's legit or just another half-hearted venture they're funding. No one talks about me. Or at least they don't say much where it can get back to me. But I did get a card last year. No return address, just my name in familiar cursive. Inside it read, "I think about you more than you know. I'm sorry we didn't do better. I wish we could start over than that. Mom." It should have moved me. Maybe it did, a little. But more than anything, it just felt too late. You don't get to erase a lifetime of silence with a sentence. Not when you had decades to speak. I didn't respond, because here's the truth. I don't need them to be different anymore. I don't need them to realize what they did. I don't need their regret. I needed their love when I was 5 and confused why Josh always got the last slice. When I was 13 and grounded for crying after being left out. When I was 22, standing alone in an attic with a letter from a stranger explaining who I really was. That time is gone. So is the need. What I have now is better. Peace that doesn't rely on anyone else's approval. Relationships built on honesty, not obligation. A future that's mine to shape, not handed to me with strings attached. Some people think family is everything. I used to believe that too. But now I know family is who chooses you back, and I choose me. Sometimes I still catch myself flinching at things most people wouldn't think twice about. A mother calling her daughter sweetheart in the grocery store. A family photo framed on a coworker's desk. The ease with which people talk about going home for the holidays. It doesn't hurt the way it used to. Not like a fresh wound, but the scar is there. Faint, but permanent. A quiet reminder of who I used to be, and how hard I had to fight to become someone else. There are still nights I wonder who Denise was, whether she ever thought of me, whether she hoped I was happy. Sometimes I wish I could tell her I made it. It was messy and painful, but I made it. But mostly I don't look back anymore, not with longing, not even with anger, just a kind of distant understanding, like rereading a chapter of a book you've outgrown. The pain doesn't define me anymore, but it shaped me. It made me sharper, softer, stronger. It taught me boundaries. It taught me that love without respect is just control in disguise. And it taught me that silence, especially the kind we endure to keep the peace, can be just as violent as shouting. Most of all, it taught me this. Not everyone who shares your blood shares your heart. Some people are given the title family by chance. Others earn it through kindness, honesty, and choice. And sometimes, the people who love you best are the ones who find you along the way, not the ones you started with. I used to think I needed a family to be whole. Now I know. I just needed the space to be fully, unapologetically me. So if you're out there holding onto a version of love that hurts, hear this. You don't have to keep earning what should have been freely given. You don't have to stay small just to stay accepted. And you don't have to call a place home if it never felt like one. Family is not where you're born. It's where you are seen, chosen, valued, and that's the only kind worth keeping.